At some point, the Patricians were so desperate that they came up with a plan to assassinate a tribune of the people. Since the secession of the Plebeians, an event that had seen the people leave the city in protest, the powers of the tribunes of the people who had come into office as part of the truce that was reached had continued to grow. While the office of the tribune of the people had been created to protect the rights of the plebeians, it had slowly acquired the powers to impeach consuls and senators who were deemed to stand in the way of the aspirations of the people, in particular the Agrarian Law. The first to be impeached by the tribune of the people was Marcius Coriolanus. He went into exile. Later on, Menenius and Servilius faced the same fate. While the tribune of the people planned to impeach yet another set of just retired consuls, the Patricians decided to end this encroachment by planning an assassination. I welcome you to my YouTube channel where I explore ancient texts, and ancient texts here I mean texts that have been around for thousands of years. At the moment I'm going through From the Founding of the City by Titus Livius. This is a collection of books actually that were written about 2000 years ago, and they cover the history of Rome from the founding of the city, which happened around 730 BCE, to around the time that Augustus was the emperor of Rome, which was close to 0 AD. If you've not subscribed, subscribe so that you don't miss any of the videos that I upload. When Lucius, Furius, and Caicos Manlius were consuls, one of the tribunes of the people was Gnaeus Genucius. Now, Gnaeus Genucius decides to start excite the people about the Agrarian Law. Now, I've explained the Agrarian Law to be a law that was proposed by one Cassius, and the law was supposed to give the plebeians more land. But the Patricians stood in the way of this law. They were doing everything to avoid it being enacted. Now, Gnaeus Genucius becomes the tribune of the people alongside others, but he is mentioned by Livy as the one who was very active in exciting people or trying to push the people to ask for this law to be enacted. Meanwhile, the consuls, that is Furius and Manlius, they went very hard on opposing these actions. And Livy tells us that indeed they did use violence, and at some point Genucius was threatening them that they were going to be impeached if they continue with what they were doing, but these consuls refused to be intimidated, even when they were reminded of what had happened previously, especially to two other consuls, that is Titus Menenius Lanatus and Servilius, who were impeached immediately after their terms ended, and in fact one of them was sentenced to death. So Livy tells us that Furius and Manlius continued to oppose the actions of Genucius even under these threats. But when their term ended, Genucius went after them. In fact, Genucius decides to go ahead and impeach them, to punish them for whatever they had done to try to stop the people from pushing for the Agrarian Law to be adopted. Now, when Furius and Manlius learned that Genucius had decided to impeach them, they decided to do something. Livy tells us that they put on what he describes as mourning garb, which basically I understand to be they put on clothes that people usually put on when they are mourning a death. And they started moving around, talking especially to the younger senators and telling them about the issue of the tribunes of the people impeaching consuls every time the consuls retire. And Livy says that Furius and Manlius were telling especially these younger senators that they should not aspire to be consuls, because being a consul was turning to be something that was very dangerous. And Livy says that they were telling them that being a consul was like just accepting that you are going to be sentenced to death because of what was happening to consuls who retire. They told them that by becoming a consul, you are basically making yourself a victim ready to be sacrificed. They told them that the office of the consul had been captured and crushed by the tribune of the people. So they told them that consuls were basically turning into servants or juniors of the tribunes of the people, something that was not supposed to be, because consuls were supposed to be above that. But now they were doing everything according to the desires of the tribunes of the people. This is what Livy writes: if a consul took an active line, if he showed any regard for the patricians, if he thought that anything besides the plebeians formed part of the commonwealth, he should keep before his eyes the banishment of Coriolanus Marcius, the condemnation and death of Titus Menenius Lanatus. What they were basically saying is that where things had reached is that a consul was not supposed for even a bit to try to push anything that seemed like it was going to benefit the patricians. If they did that, then they faced punishment through impeachment. That's how they described it, especially to these younger senators. Now, Livy doesn't tell us why these two decided to talk to the younger senators. Maybe they figured out that the younger senators were likely aspiring to be consuls, or more likely aspiring to be consuls than the older senators, or they had other reasons why they chose these younger senators. Nevertheless, when the senators saw that Genucius was going ahead with his impeachment motion, they decided to meet and decide what to do. And Livy tells us that they met in private. They didn't meet in the Senate house. They met in private, and only a few people were invited, not everyone. A few trusted senators from, of course, the patrician class were invited to these meetings that were happening in private. This is what Livy writes about the conclusions of those private meetings. As at one point on which they were agreed was that the two who were impeached were to be rescued by lawful or unlawful means. The most desperate plan was the most acceptable, and men were found who advocated the most daring crime. Now, seems like these senators, after having these consultations in private, they do decide on what to do, and as Livy describes it, they decided that whatever was needed to be done was to be done, whether it was lawful or unlawful. On the day of the trial, people gather at the forum, which is like a public assembly place. People have gathered there. They are waiting for Genucius to come and present his impeachment motion. The plebeians are there, the senators are there, the consuls are there, everybody's there waiting. But the person who has not shown up is Genucius himself. They wait for him to show up and they didn't see him. Now, as time went by, the plebeians started wondering what had happened to him, and some started saying that it seemed like he had been intimidated and maybe he was staying away because he had been told that he shouldn't show up and present his motion. That's what people thought for the most part, at least initially. And they started complaining that that meant that they had been betrayed. So they counted Genucius as someone who was betraying them by not showing up and present the motion that he had promised to present before the people, before the assembly, that is. Now, soon someone came, or a few people came to the assembly and brought the news that Genucius had been found dead in his house. Livy does not give us the details about his death, but he just reports that he's found dead in his house by people who are waiting for him outside his house. Maybe they were waiting for him so that they accompany him to the assembly. And then at last they decide to go and check on him, and they find him on the floor dead. Now, when this news reaches the assembly, the plebeians are very sad. They are in a sorrowful mood. They start mourning Genucius. Livy tells us that the people, the plebeians in particular, dispersed, and the mood was like they had lost a general. Genucius was this person they looked up to guide them and to lead them into having the agrarian law implemented, and also to defend them in many other ways. So when they hear that Genucius is dead, the people just dispersed. They leave the assembly. Now, the fellow tribunes of the people, Livy tells us that they became very scared, because they were like, if Genucius can have this done to him, then the rest of us are very vulnerable. This is what Livy says. The tribunes especially were alarmed, for they were warned by their colleagues' death how absolutely ineffective the sacred law was for their protection. So they realized that they were so vulnerable that people could do things to them. The law was there, yes, but seemed like it wasn't able to protect them from threats and even death or murder. Now, meanwhile, the patricians were celebrating. They were happy. They seemed like they knew what had happened, or they had a hand in it. This is what Livy writes. The patricians, on the other hand, showed extravagant delight. So far was any one of them from regretting the crime, that even those who had taken no part in it were anxious to appear as though they had. And it was openly asserted that the tribunician power must be chastised into submission. So the patricians were celebrating, and they didn't even hide the fact that they did it. And in fact, even those who had nothing to do with the death or the assassination, kind of like were trying to make it seem like they played a role in it. That was the mood amongst the patricians. While the plebeians were mourning, of course, the death of this man that they looked up to guide them into a better future, the patricians were celebrating. Now, after the death of Genucius, the impact was immediately felt. Livy tells us that not long after his death, the consuls issued a demand that people should pay a levy. While the plebeians did not like to pay this levy, they had nothing to do really. They had to pay because nobody will protect them from not paying. And while they were collecting this levy, the tribunes of the people, the ones who were still alive, said nothing. They remained silent because they were scared of doing anything. The people had lost hope when they saw this happening, that the levy can be collected, the tribunes of the people are silent, they are not saying anything. This is what Livy says. The plebeians say that it was all over with their liberty. They had gone back to the old state of things. The tribunician power was dead and buried with Genucius. So basically they were saying now there is no hope for us. Looks like the liberty is gone for us as the plebeians. And in fact, they said that it had been buried alongside Genucius. So it was like there is nothing now for us here. But something else happened later and things changed again. And that's what I'm going to cover in my next video. Now, if you enjoyed this video, take a moment to like it. I'll really appreciate you doing that. See you in the next video.